In this video, we're going to talk about the trim markers and the range marker, and that is actually one of the things that I think is the most confusing thing about VideoStudio 10. Too long, didn't watch. Here's the summary of the trim markers. If you have project selected, the trim markers represent the portion of the project that will play back when you press the play button. If you have clip selected and a title track clip is selected, then the trim markers actually control how much of the clip is trimmed, where you trim them. So that's the only mode where you're actually trimming video. If the clip is selected and you have an overlay selected, this line becomes blue, and that has nothing to do with trimming or preview. This has to do with motion and the amount of motion that happens, or the duration of motion, when the overlay is using basic motion. So now we'll talk about that in more detail. So to understand this, you first need to understand that there are really three modes that this trim marker and range marker within the navigation area is. First is when you have the project selected. The second is if you have a clip selected, it's operating differently. And the third is if you have an overlay clip. So I'm going to click on an overlay clip, and notice that this becomes blue. This line becomes blue, and it means something very different than if a non-overlay clip, the standard clip, is selected, or if the project is selected. So let's talk basically about what these things are, what they're representing. So if I'm looking at the project, this white bar is actually representing the preview area. So if you can see in the normal area here, the timeline panel, there's an orange line here, and that is the portion of your project that will play when you click the play button. So if I click this play button, it will just limit its play to here. So I'll do that. So the value of that is, of course, that I don't have to keep dragging the scrubber to a proper position if I'm trying to edit a particular portion of the video. So in this view, this white part here correlates to this orange part, and then the rest of the bar represents the entire project. So this portion that doesn't have a white bar represents all of the project that's outside of this orange, both to the left and to the right. And we'll come back to the project a little bit later. So now let me select clip. When I'm looking at a clip in the regular timeline, or the title track, this white bar represents the clip itself. The part that it does not have a white bar is the portion of the clip that you could be using, but you've trimmed your clip some. So if I grab the scrubber head in the preview area, notice that right here is where I get to the end of that clip, but there's video, and this is the video that's left over that I could be adding to my project. So when I have the clip selected, I'm looking at what portion of this clip is part of my project. Now, on the other hand, when I click on an overlay clip, clip will be selected, but now the bar is blue, and this means something really different. What this is about is the duration time if you use basic motion. Now, you may not be using basic motion. By default, when you have an overlay, it doesn't move. It's just static, and it's in that window. So in that particular case, this blue bar really has no meaning. So as I, for example, take this overlay clip and I extend it, notice it does change a little bit with the blue bar, but that's just not much of anything. It's not really trying to tell you anything. And so as I scrub this, I'm kind of wondering, well, what does this have to do with anything? So you can't really see anything going on because it really doesn't apply. So let's show how it does apply. So I'm going to open up the options once I've selected the overlay clip. And I've got basic motion. Now notice it's got the center thing selected, and that means static, so it means it's not moving. So this basic motion here is allowing an overlay to do some standard things. So for right now, all we're going to do is we're going to enter from the left and then exit to the right. So I'll click on this little arrow here, and it'll say enter from the left, and I'll exit to the right. So what will happen is, from this point in time of the project until this point in time, that's how long it will take for the overlay to move into its current position. Then it will stay in that position for as long as that blue bar is, and then it will exit, and it will take the time from that duration until the end of the overlay clip. Yeah, now that's real simple to understand, right? So let's move the scrubber and show what that's like. So notice, of course, in all of the situations, the scrubber in the preview area is correlated to the scrubber in the timeline. So let's move it all the way out. And what we see is the overlay is moving from the beginning of the project until it hits that portion of time right here. And then it stays stationary for a certain period of time. And then it will exit. Now, the very fact that this blue line matches almost exactly that orange line is more coincidental, because if you'll notice, let me switch back to the project. And I'm going to change the project preview area, the orange bar, to make it longer. And now I'll switch back to the overlay, and you'll see it doesn't really correlate there. That was just coincidental. And so at the end of the blue is when it starts its motion, and it will continue its motion until the overlay clip is finished. So if I drag this overlay clip in, it really doesn't, you don't really see too much there that's happening. But what you will see is, notice that again it starts moving here, and it moves off until the end of the clip. So as we deal with the trim markers in this range marker, whenever it's blue, you should remember that it really has nothing to do with the normal way of operating by trimming clips and things. It's just showing the duration. And consequently, it means that you have an overlay selected. Okay, so let's look at the normal way that we will be dealing with that, and go to a title track. And so let's first start with the project, because the project is really the easiest thing to deal with, because this is really non-destructive, because any moving of the trim markers, or if I move this scrubber and I click on the trim marker here, all this is doing when you have the project selected is the playback region, defining that playback region. So it's easy to deal with, and it's non-destructive. And so if you want it to play the whole project, you can just drag the trim markers out to the ends. So now if you think about it, what that means is that only when you have clip selected is this really about trimming your clips. So as I look at the clip here, remember this region here is about what we cannot see in our project. So if I take this timeline scrubber and I start moving it, the first thing that you'll notice is that it switches immediately to project. Let me go to the very end of the project right here, and so you'll see that the timeline scrubber in the preview is at its end, and we're at the end of the clip right here. But when I click on clip, now this clip is selected, and so there's actually some portion of the clip that is not being rendered, that's not being used in the project. If I want to see that, then I don't want to move this timeline scrubber here, because if I do, this is going to switch to project. But if I move the scrubber in the preview window, when I do that, now I can see part of the clip that is not part of the project. So if I need to make it a little bit larger, let's say I want to move it to this point where my finger's right in the middle there, Then I can say, okay, I want to trim to here. Now to get it to go exactly to this point, I could drag this trim marker, but I can also just click on the mark out and it will pop right to that portion. So now we can see that the project ends right at that point. So, and we can see it if we scrub it this way, it'll go away because we're showing in project. I can do the same thing. So let's say I wanted to find a starting place. So we start, let's say, right when my hand points to those cards there. Again, I can click on the trim and it will shorten the clip because it's actually literally trimming it. Of course, it's not getting rid of any of your video. It's only trimming it with respect to the project. The final thing to be aware of is, just like it works on the clips here, it can also work on the same thing on clips that are just in your library over here. So here I can select another video, and now it's working the same way. I can drag the timeline scrubber. Well, there you go. So there's something interesting. My hand starts to move in. So let's say that we want to trim it and start it right there. So I can press my mark in at that point, and let's stop it when it gets all the way here, and my mark out. So now I've trimmed the clip, and now if I drag it in, it will already be pre-trimmed to the right size that I want it. So if I start moving the project scrubber in the main timeline, it'll switch to project, and we'll see that it starts right when the hand moves and ends when the hand gets to these characters. And the final point to mention is, notice the scissors here. No matter what thing you're working with, if you click on the scissors, they will cut the clip. It doesn't matter which thing, whether you've got the overlay selected or the regular title track or anything. If you click on the scissors, they'll split the clip. And so that's the essence of the trim markers in all their different modes. Hope that helps.